There is an event in the sacred scriptures that seems to challenge everything we know about the nature of God. Jacob wrestled with God through an entire night and prevailed. How is it possible that the Almighty could be held back by a human being? Is the Bible exaggerating? Or is something far deeper happening in this scene than our eyes can see at first reading? This is, without question, one of the densest, most mysterious, and most personally relevant narratives in all of Scripture. And when we understand what is truly at stake, the question stops being about God and starts being about us. To grasp the full meaning of the wrestling match, we need to enter the context in which Jacob found himself before it began. Genesis 32 presents a man at the peak of his existential crisis. After years of living far from home, manipulating, deceiving, and constantly reinventing himself to survive, Jacob is about to come face to face with his twin brother Esau, the same man he had wronged twice. First, he seized the birthright by trading a bowl of stew for it while his brother was hungry. Then, when he disguised himself before their blind father, Isaac, and stole the blessing that belonged to the firstborn. Now Esau is approaching with 400 armed men, and Jacob knows that none of his usual schemes are going to solve what is coming. He splits his possessions into two groups to limit losses, sends gifts ahead hoping to soften his brother, and places the family on the other side of the river. Then the text says something simple and devastating. Jacob was left alone. It was the first time in a very long time that the most cunning man of his generation stood without resources, without schemes, and without a way out. And it is precisely in that void, in that forced solitude, that the encounter takes place. Without warning, without introduction, without explanation, a man appears and begins to wrestle with Jacob in the darkness of the night. The scene is deliberately enigmatic. The text does not immediately identify the opponent, as though it wants the reader to follow Jacob's own growing realization. What we technically call a theophany, a visible, tangible manifestation of God to a human being, here takes a form that defies every expectation. God had appeared to Abraham as a traveler seeking hospitality in the shade of a tent. He had manifested to Moses as a bush that burned without being consumed, something familiar to a desert shepherd's daily life, yet radically impossible. For Jacob, however, the manifestation is a full-bodied wrestling match that lasts the entire night. And this is not arbitrary. God always reveals himself in a form that speaks directly to the inner reality of the person he encounters. Jacob had spent his entire life fighting, from the womb, where he competed for space with Esau, in adolescence when he schemed to obtain the birthright, in his father's house when he deceived Isaac, and during years of work under Laban, where the contest of wits never stopped. Jacob was the master of self-sufficiency, the professional schemer. Therefore, nothing was more fitting than God appearing as an opponent, because it was the only language Jacob understood at a visceral level. God was not simply fighting him, he was using the wrestling match as a mirror, revealing to Jacob who he truly was on the inside, an external war that exposed an internal war that had been going on for decades. The text of Genesis 32 carries one of the most theologically loaded observations in the entire Bible. When the man saw that he could not overpower him. This phrase has stopped generations of readers, and for good reason. The direct answer is clear. God could have ended that contest at any moment. What happens next proves it in irrefutable terms. With a single touch to the socket of Jacob's hip, the joint dislocates, and the man who had resisted for hours of full-force struggle instantly becomes incapacitated. If a single touch produces that effect, what would have happened if God had actually wrestled to win? What the text is describing, therefore, is not a limitation of God. It is a deliberate choice of self-limitation. like a father who crouches down to play wrestle with his young child, who lets the child push back, resist, and believe he is winning. Because the goal is not victory, it is relationship, formation, the kind of teaching that only happens in that proximity. God did not want to crush Jacob. He wanted to transform him, and those are completely distinct operations that require completely distinct approaches. Why then did God wound Jacob? If the objective was transformation and not destruction, why inflict a permanent injury? The answer lies precisely in the type of wound chosen. The hip tendon, the foundation of the body's support, the fulcrum of walking, the source of strength in the legs, was the perfect symbol for Jacob's self-sufficiency. His entire life had been built on the certainty that he could manage on his own, that cleverness was enough, that with the right scheme, no one could catch him. God touched that specific point not out of cruelty, but out of surgical precision. Limping, unable to run, unable to fight at full strength, with no option to flee, Jacob was reduced to a single possibility: to hold on. And that is exactly what he does. The man who had spent decades seizing blessings through force and deception, now, for the first time, refuses to release the only one who can truly bless him. God wounded Jacob to save him. The injury was not punishment, it was grace. It was a wound that liberates, a touch that breaks on the outside but heals on the inside. An intervention that destroyed Jacob's confidence in himself so that he could finally deposit that confidence somewhere other than himself. And that divine logic resonates far beyond the text. When God touches something we consider our strength, our health, our plans, our finances, our relationships, the instinctive reaction is to interpret it as an attack. But the pattern of Genesis 32 suggests another possibility. Sometimes what looks like tragedy is a disguised new beginning, and the pain we experience as punishment may in fact be the only thing capable of stopping us in time. Then comes the decisive moment. The opponent, knowing that dawn is approaching, asks to be released, and Jacob, wounded, limping, exhausted, responds with one of the most courageous sentences in the entire Bible: "I will not let you go unless you bless me." It is a complete character reversal. The same Jacob who had stolen blessings through disguise and lies now understands at the core of his being that a true blessing cannot be taken, it can only be received. Not through force, but through surrender. Not through scheming, but through dependence. And then the opponent asks a question that on the surface seems unnecessary. What is your name? God already knew Jacob's name. He knows everyone's name. This question was not for information, it was for confrontation. It was an invitation for Jacob to look in the mirror and say out loud what he saw. Because in biblical culture, a name is not merely an identification label, it is the full symbolic weight of an entire identity. And the name Jacob meant deceiver, supplanter, the one who pushes ahead by dishonest means. The scene deliberately echoes an earlier moment when Isaac, blind and near death, had asked the son standing before him, "Who are you, my son?" And Jacob had lied, claiming to be Esau. Now, at the bank of the Jabbok, in the presence of God, the same question of identity returns. And this time, Jacob does not lie. He says, "I am Jacob." And in those 3 words is contained a full confession of everything he was, everything he had done, all the years of manipulation and deception. That admission opens the space for redemption, because God cannot transform what a man refuses to acknowledge. Response to Jacob's confession is immediate and irreversible. Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. The name Israel is etymologically rich and theologically dense. The Hebrew root combines the verb sarita, to struggle with, to prevail, with El, the designation for God. Israel, therefore, carries the meaning of one who struggles with God, one who perseveres before God, or in an alternate interpretation, let God prevail. The old Jacob, the professional schemer, dies there in that pre-dawn darkness, and Israel is born. A new name, a new identity, a new destiny. But what does it actually mean to prevail against God? How can anyone overcome the Almighty? The key is in the question itself. Jacob did not overpower God through strength. That would have been impossible, as the touch on his hip demonstrated conclusively. Jacob prevailed through perseverance in weakness. He won not because he brought God down, but because he refused to let go of God when everything in his body and his circumstances screamed that it was time to release. While many people let go when God seems distant or when pain hits hard, Jacob held on tighter. While others run when life stops making sense, Jacob refused to open his hand before receiving the blessing. And that is the biblical definition of prevailing, not the absence of wounding, not strength that never fails, but the refusal to quit, even while limping, even while weeping, even without fully understanding what is happening. Jacob walked away from that night limping. The text of Genesis records carefully that he was hobbling on his hip, and that the Israelites, in memory of that moment, do not eat to this day the tendon attached to the socket of the hip of any animal. The injury was permanent and visible. For anyone who saw him walk, it would have been impossible not to notice that something had happened to this man. And that is, in a sense, the final and most silent point of the entire narrative. The man who had walked through life with the arrogance of someone who always has a plan, who never needed anyone, who always came out on top, now walks with a limp that tells his story with every step. The injury is not a mark of shame, it is a testimony. It is the physical proof that there was a night when a man met God and did not come away unscathed, and that this encounter was the best thing that ever happened to him in his entire life. Jacob was defeated that night, and that defeat was his greatest victory, because it was there that he stopped pretending, stopped manipulating, stopped running. He learned to confess, to depend, to surrender, and discovered that the blessing he had spent an entire lifetime chasing with his own hands had been waiting for him on the other side of surrender all along. To prevail against God is, in the end, to lose everything that is false in us, in order to gain everything that is true in Him.